We're going to start with, today I'm going to just a couple reminders, and watch me validate my own reminder and make sure everybody's got their phones off. If you would be kind enough to do that. And I'm also going to ask that we conduct ourselves in the proper manner, no outbursts as we heard and things of this nature. So let's just conduct ourselves and let the testimony be given. Of course, we've vetted these bills in subcommittees, and so this is a full committee hearing. And today I will start it off with House Bill 121 and Chairman Mark Hamilton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I bring before the committee House Bill 121, which is LC 287386. This is a bill that was a result of a combination of several years of work by the Georgia Election Advisory Council that the Secretary Brian Kemp put together several years ago. Consisted of people from around the state in the elections, local elections state. We had several House members, several Senate members. We had people from the Republican Party, people from the Democratic Party, and they made a series of recommendations. And I thought for what I would do today is I would just kind of briefly tell a little bit about each section, and then be happy to answer any questions. And Section 1 deals with write-in candidates. Basically, it just clarifies right now there's no requirement for permission of the person that be written in. So someone could actually say that we want to put your name in as a write-in candidate. And this just says if you're going to do that, for it to be valid or to be counted, you have to go to that person so that they would authorize that. Pretty simple. In sections 2, 3, 5, 7, 10, and 17, it's really just a reduction of code. There are no longer municipal registrars around the state, and it simply strikes all the language referencing municipal registrars. And then Section 4 comes from the Secretary of State's office as a recommendation. Several years ago when we put legislation together on enrollment cards, we used a tribal enrollment card, which was language from Arizona. And unfortunately what we did was we referenced a ID number. Well, in Georgia, those IDs do not have a number, so we're just changing the language so that they produce that document. Another Secretary of State's recommendation, Section 6, deals with a memorandum of understanding that we have with other states, about 35 states, that we share data. And in our code, we say that we will not, that this data will not be extended. Well, we really can't control what other states do, so it's just cleaning that language up. Section 8. We have terms in code that says registration card. Well, we don't really have a registration card. It's called a precinct card, so we're simply just clarifying that. Section 9 deals with people coming in from a different county and how they do that. This allows a change of address, and so it just streamlines the change of address process. On change of address, removes a step in that. Section 11. Section 11, we're simply meeting federal law on Unicava ballots, overseas ballots, dealing with a presidential preference primary. And then Section 12, this deals with absentee ballot envelopes. We basically say that they have to put in there, we add the words voting purposes, so someone may have an overseas address, another address. We're really talking about the voting, the address for voting purposes. And then Section 13 deals with the UOCAVA. You may remember that we passed the legislation several years ago creating a pilot for overseas voting, and we're going to be hopefully doing that this next election cycle. But it doesn't contain the language for a presidential preference primary, and so we would just include that as part of the election cycle. And then Section 14 was a scribbling error where we had a hanging paragraph, so we just simply moved that over and put some clarifying language in there. 15 was dealing with confusion in voting locations. We allow voting locations. There's the polling place, and then within the place you have two divided areas. And what's happened is what's in certain areas, tables have been moved into the public space, and we're just saying that those tables, like all other things, can't be in that space. They just have to go out the 150 feet. and we've given the polling managers, if you will, the ability to control that. And then finally, Section 16 just has to do with provisional ballots. Right now, we've had cases where 150 people would show up at a county acknowledging that that's not their home county, but they wanted to provide those ballots. And the rules, the Georgia rules say that you can't do that, but the code was a little bit unclear, so the code just drafts that. And that's, in essence, what it does, and I'll be happy to answer any questions, Mr. Chairman. And I also, by the way, I have people from the Secretary of State's office, should there be some technical questions or other things that I'm not able to answer.
Thank you so much, Chairman Hamilton. At this time, we'll entertain questions from any members of the committee or the author. Great. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to pass.
A motion do pass. A second?
Second.
Got a second. We've got a waive. Okay. Thank you so much. Got a motion, a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, like sign. Thank you. House Bill 121 passes. Chairman Hamilton, we're going to let you continue with House Bill 194.
Thank you very much. 194 is what's called early voting bill. It basically takes the early voting process that we have and tries to build more of a unified schedule, if you will, towards the early voting process. It does not change the election day requirements. It does not change the 45-day absentee ballot process, but it takes the early voting, advanced voting, if you will, and changes that so that it is 10 business days. So it would be Monday through Friday, the 2 weeks prior to the election day. And it says those will be business hours of which they can extend those hours. The local board can extend those hours and locations as they have always been able to do. It then says that Saturday, in between those 2 weeks, that Saturday will be mandatory. We tried that several years ago. It's worked well, so we're going to make that from a 9 to 4. So you have that Saturday. And since Sunday voting started over the last year or so, seems to be an appeal for Sunday voting. However, there's still people around this state that have a religious concern over mandating of Sunday voting. We said we would give the local election board the option to either, purely their option, they can choose to vote on that Sunday from 12 to 4. If they do not want to vote on that Sunday from 12 to 4, then they can vote the Saturday prior to the Monday voting that it all starts from 9 to 1. And the only other change we put in there is that whichever one of those they decide, they need to do that prior and notify the Secretary of State's office and do it prior to the 45-day absentee ballot, so that what we have is all those decisions are made prior to the 45 days, so that there's no changes during that 45-day process. The other change that we put in there is that for general election runoffs, state and federal, and special election runoffs, there's a time crunch, and so we changed the language to be as it currently is, that they can do it as practical, because right now, the most recent example several weeks ago, we had 2 runoffs around the state. It's very unpractical that those ballots are going to be approved and sent back and set up in the machines. Probably it's going to be somewhere between 5 and 10 days based on the schedule. So we're going to continue to operate that as we have all other runoffs versus mandate that's those 2 weeks. And in essence, Mr. Chairman, that's what the legislation does.
Thank you so much. And for clarification, let's make sure everybody knows what LC number we're working off of.
I'm sorry, that is 287480S.
All right, and at this time, the committee will entertain questions for the author of the bill. Representative Oliver.
Mr. Hamilton, you and I have dealt with this bill in the past. Are you aware of which committee member has the highest percentage of voters that early vote?
Not specifically. I'm assuming I have a high number.
You have the highest.
Okay.
In the presidential year, 59.4% of your voters voted early, and in the governor's race, 43.6%. All of the rest of the committees are between 22 and your high number of 43%. My question is, if we found something that voters like, why are we taking it away from them?
Well, I'll answer it this way, Representative Oliver. I don't think we're taking away something necessarily that they like. I think that my district, since you referenced that, my assumption will be in the discussions I've had, they will still continue to vote early. They will just vote early those first 2 weeks. What's amazing to me is only 4% of the population chooses to vote with absentee, even though that gives you 45 days. In just about all the data that I've looked at, that anywhere, depending on which election you're talking about, anywhere from 60 to 75% statewide of voters vote election day. Typically, the next highest day is the Friday before. And I've verified that information with the Secretary of State's office. I've given that information to the minority leader to ensure that full disclosure on that. And so what we see is the lowest of the early voting of the current 3-week process that we have, the lowest percentage of voters vote the first week. The next week it builds up to the next level, and then the next highest one is the third week or the week closest to the election day, with that Friday being the highest day and election day being the highest day of the week, of the whole voting cycle.
Thank you. Who has number 16?
I do, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hamilton, does this bill give voters, just trying to understand it fully, more time or less time to vote?
This gives them the same amount of time from an absentee ballot standpoint, and it gives them less time as far as early voting.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
No, someone just caught my attention.
Oh.
The 45 days does not change, and so every citizen, every eligible voter has 45 days. I had someone yesterday say, what if I plan a 2-week trip to go to Spain and therefore I can't do it? I said, well, just probably as you have made exceptions for your mail, your garbage pickup, all the other things, your yard care, whatever it might be, you have that same ability to vote early through the absentee ballot process. And so you still have 45 days available for anybody to vote using absentee ballot. Does not change one bit. You still have at least 2 weeks, depending on how your local community decides to do it. You still have at least one Saturday, maybe a Saturday and a half, maybe a Saturday and a Sunday. And so the numbers that I've looked at have indicated that early voting, people like it, and that's what we're doing. But the fact that if we're reducing the numbers doesn't mean that people will vote, less people will vote.
Follow-up question?
I'll waive.
Thank you so much. Number 26, my good friend Howard, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hamilton, what's driving this? What's driving us taking this action now?
As I told someone today, there's 2 primary reasons, and then there's a third that I will kind of use, I'll talk about. First is uniformity, that we've heard from many people that this last election cycle that there was a lot of confusion over the Saturdays, the Sundays, and how we're going to do that. So we said, how can we create more uniformity? And part of that uniformity is the fact that we've got municipal elections being held one year that are different, and so we're putting on par, if you will. The county elections and the municipal elections will all be done the same way, and we've made a much more consistent how we're going to vote, how we're going to set those days up. So it's all about, that part is about uniformity. And then for those that live in probably what I would call the more rural communities that have fewer voters, what they say is that they're paying, under state law, they have to have 3 certified poll workers at each poll, that they've got 3 poll workers sitting in polls with nobody coming to vote, that they just don't have the voter activity. They don't have the voter turnout. And so this is recognizing the fact that it gives every community, if they so choose, to reduce their cost, reduce their payroll, should they want to, they have the ability to reduce that cost, a minimum of 3 to 5 days, depending on which option they go with. And so it is a combination of uniformity to help reduce the confusion for the voter, as well as offering cost savings to our respective taxpayers across Georgia. The third part of that is not a reason, but as I looked at that, we've heard a lot of anecdotal discussions, but the simple reality is people that are going to vote are going to find a way to vote, and those that are not are going to not. We've seen no impact on how we do this. And so all we're doing, in my estimation, is that we're going to take people that would typically vote that first week, and they will typically either choose to vote through absentee, or they will vote the next 2 weeks, or they'll vote election day. But it's not like they don't have plenty of opportunities to exercise their ability to vote.
So from a
Would you
practical...
like to follow up?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Please follow up.
Okay. So from a practical standpoint, if they had 100% voter turnout, it'd be okay to have a longer run time to have the elections, versus if the turnout is low, we can shrink the amount of time because it wouldn't have an adverse effect on.
I'm not sure I understand the question about 100% turnout. The simple reality is that the local election office, should they determine, because of that reduction in number of days, if they want to extend the hours later, they have that ability. So they have the ability for their particular area on those 10 business days to adjust it as necessary. They have the ability to increase the number of poll locations. We're simply just compressing it into a much more consistent and predictable time frame.
Any other questions of the chairman? At this time, I'll entertain a motion.
Move to pass.
Motion do pass. Do I have a second?
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, will y'all not be taking public comment on this?
I actually think I made that comment in the early stage when I said we took public comment during the subcommittee, and that was the process. So I'm sorry if you didn't hear that or I didn't say it loud enough.
And I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, that was not said, but we do actually have folks who weren't at the subcommittee, and we also have new committee members who were not at the subcommittee, so I don't believe all the committee members have all the facts to make this decision.
Thank you so much for your point.
Thank you.
We've got a motion and a second. Any discussion? Representative Oliver, please.
I forget, Mr. Chairman, and what did this committee do on this bill last year?
I'll just
And I'll have one other question that you may address too, because it really does relate. What percentage of the small, how are you characterizing the small city considerations? Because those are the people that were most vocal in the past about the cost issue, and you were most knowledgeable about that.
Representative Fleming.
You know, small is in the eye of the beholder, I guess you would say. The little towns in my district, Daring, for example, which has, less than 500 people or somewhere in that effect, they're not going to be happy with this bill, because they think for 2 weeks you're going to keep the polls open and you're going to have maybe a half a dozen people vote, literally, particularly in municipal elections. And with a town that size and a budget that small, if they could have election day voting, they would be happy with that. And so, small, I don't know how you want to describe it, but the Georgia Municipal Association did last year, when I had a bill that would have affected then only municipal elections, had a long list of small cities that were basically begging us to do something about the impact on their budget from the massive amount of early voting in their view that we had. So I'm not sure how you would want to describe small, but there's a lot of them.
That is consistent with my memory. And my question really is, I'm trying to figure out for myself, of our 10 million Georgians, and I should know and I don't know whether it's 7 million registered voters or whatever the number is, does this bill about cost only address 100,000 people? That's what I'm trying to figure out in my mind, because my county of 800,000 people, where several 100,000 people vote early, fast-growing like Forsyth, the numbers benefit the vast, vast, vast majority of voters. Your small city's concern, which is a legitimate concern, addresses a smaller, and I'm trying to figure out the number of voters.
If I may, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I appreciate that perspective, certainly, because we know we work for all Georgians here, and there's a part of me that goes, at the end of the day, whether it's 6.9 million people you say you represent and we only represent 100,000, I don't know where that balance is, but I get your point. Yeah. I don't know if it's that far off, though.
Right.
Yeah.
But thank you for that.
Well,
Representative Fleming.
Briefly, Mr. Chairman, what we're searching for here, and the key word you've heard is uniformity. This is not good enough, in my opinion, for those small cities that I represent. They really don't need the expenditures that this causes for the amount of voters that they have. And it's not a Democrat-Republican issue for them. This is a budget issue. So, but however, though, I think there is one of the criticisms of my bill last year was it's only going to affect cities. Excuse me, in off-year elections. And that wasn't that going to be a little bit confusing possibly to voters when they could vote only a short period of time here and a longer period of time there. And I had to concede that, yes, there was a valid point to be made there. So I think what you have in front of you is a compromise between what a lot of people in Georgia would like and your point of view that you would like more time. So, and of course, we have to do that down here all the time.
Final, if I may, Mr. Chairman.
Please.
I would agree on the issue of uniformity, and I would agree with parts of 194 in relation to consistency on Saturday and Sunday, and that would represent a compromise. But I cannot agree to cut off what people between 20 and 60% of Georgians are taking the benefit of.
Thank you so much for those thoughts. We've got a motion and second. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. No. Ayes clearly have it. Next. Well, we won't do it via roll call. All those in favor of the bill, please raise your hand. 9. Is that what you get, Ms. Oliver? Okay, thank you. And those opposed? 5? Is that, for the record, is that what y'all got, 9 to 5? Thank you. Pardon me? Yeah, the one independent. Thank you. You're right. I do believe in humor. All right. Next on the list, we're going to House Bill 95. Representative Tanner.
Reading from LC 344394ER.
Turn that on, make sure.
Got it. Yeah. All right. Sorry about that, Mr. Chairman. Starting over, I'm reading from LC 344394ER. This bill is fairly straightforward, but currently in Georgia, we have local government investment pool as one of the ways local governments can invest money that they have on hand. There are several ways allowed under Georgia law in the code. This is one of those ways. Currently, the state treasurer manages both local government investment pool funds and state investment pool funds, and they're all commingled together in the same account. And there's a desire on the state treasurer, or a thought on the state treasurer, that best practices are going to change, which would require those monies to be separated. Under current law, though, we could not do that. So that's why this bill is brought before you, is just to give the authority to the State Depository Board, if they choose to do so, the ability to authorize the state treasurer to set up a separate trust fund for the local government investment pool money. I've discussed this bill with, anytime you bring legislation, you ask who's it going to affect. ACCG and GMA both have indicated they have no opposition to the bill.
Thank you so much. Questions of the author? Chairman Powell?
I presume that there are investment policies that are in place now for these pooled funds, And my question is, does the language in your bill that says pursuant to policies established by the State Depository Board, could that give them the latitude to do investment policies that are different than what the other pooled monies are being invested in?
Yes, the state treasurer is here. Can I ask him, Mr. Chairman, to come up? Absolutely. He's a resident expert in this area.
And I guess my question specifically, like maybe right now we're in treasuries, or we are in CDs, or we are in basically protected kind of funds. Does this allow you to invest these pooled funds in maybe new venture capital thing? That's my question, is does this give you the latitude to adopt policies that are contrary to the policies they're being invested in currently?
I'll say this, and then I'll let the treasurer respond. The State Depository Board is set up under state law, and it has certain mandates that it operates in those boundaries, and those would still be in effect for these investments, but I'll let him respond.
Thank you, sir. I'm Steve McCoy, the State Treasurer, and my office oversees the investment of these pools, local government investment pool, and also the other state operating funds and trust funds. And the State Depository Board, by law, has to establish investment policy for all those funds. And then underneath, we have guidelines that are approved by the board for each individual portfolio. They're all, we have to invest in, this does not change any of the securities that we are eligible for us to invest in. We do not invest in all those that are eligible for each portfolio, but for these, these are very conservative investments. Statute's real clear on that, that they are conservative investments. It has nothing to do with alternative investments or private equity or even equities themselves. This sole purpose for this is, it has been implied, and this pool is a very good pool. It's well run. It's had no problems. But local government investment pools across the nation, that what we're doing is we're looking at establishing best practices, that we're not regulated by the SEC as money market funds are. And so I'm chairing a task force for the National Association of State Treasurers, also a combined task force for the National Associations of Auditors, Controllers, and Treasurers. And together we're looking at developing best practices for all, they're recommending for all states. And as we're doing that, we're making sure that as those best practices are established, that we can make sure that we adhere to those. We were one of the first 2 states to get our pool rated by Standard & Poor's. We're AAA rated pool. We'll continue to do that. So this does not have anything to do with expanding the investment, the type of investments. All it does is if the board would see that it would better safeguard and allow us to disclose, be more transparent in the disclosure and safeguarding the funds in a separate trust fund, then we would do so. If it doesn't really provide a benefit, then the board would not implement a new policy to allow that.
Does that get you? Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Any other questions for the author?
Just a quick question. I'm Bruce Williamson, representative for Walton County. I'm not that familiar with these the local government pools. Are these highly liquid? Okay, because you indicated they're not. You're not putting them in equity, so it's just money market type instruments or very highly liquid investment portfolio. It's just it acts like a money market fund.
Yes, sir. We actually have 2. One of them is essentially a money run as if it were a money market fund. That it's dollars. It's a cash management and investment tool for local governments, as well as colleges and universities, authorities, and the state itself. That there's availability, next day availability for funds. If it's truly necessary, we do same day availability at times. That we invest and keep it. We manage it very similar to a money market fund, typically 60 days or less average maturity in the portfolio. We keep a significant amount that matures overnight, and then within 7 days. That's how we can achieve the AAA rating. We report every week. We monitor on a daily basis. We maintain a stable net asset value of $1. So dollar in, dollar out. SIFs are money market funds.
Just follow up. So just as a money market fund, so just you educate me on this. There's no insurance mechanism, nothing analogous to FDIC insurance or anything. It's just
there's no state guarantee. There is no federal insurance on these at all. There's some of the money market fund. That's why they're very high quality investments, and we have to monitor the operations to minimize the risk.
Well, what's the average yield now?
Average yield right now is about 16 basis points. 14.4 basis points.
Thank you. Any other questions from members of the committee? What is the pleasure of the committee? Motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Opposed, like sign. Ayes have it.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
And finally, while we just wait a little bit, go ahead. No, go ahead. Well, that's fine. We got time for Representative Turner to come up. House Bill 73.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I bring before you HB 73, which is the same bill that I brought before this committee in last year's session as HB 436, which passed unanimously out of the House and got stalled on the last day in the Senate Rules Committee. What it seeks to do is basically fix a loophole that's in current code. You probably all think that if you have a county or a local government that's set up to run for their council or their commission or their school board by a post, that it's okay to have a durational residency requirement for that specific post. For example, if here, like I'll use Cherokee as my home county as an example, we do have it broken up into 4 posts for our county commission. Current code does not allow for us to require that a candidate running for one of these posts would have to live in that district or post for a year, it says they only have to live in the county. So what could happen is somebody could live in the county for a year, move into a different post the day before an election, or I'm sorry, for qualifying, and then establish residency and be qualified to run for that particular district or post. So what this does is it enables local legislation. It does not mandate it. It offers it as an option for a local delegation to decide whether or not they want to create a durational residency requirement for these positions. And that's exactly what the bill does. And if you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you, Representative Turner. And again, for new members and myself, this bill, what happened to it last year?
It passed out of the House unanimously, went to the Senate, got out of committee unanimously, and it got stuck in rules.
All right, questions from members of the committee. Who's got number 23?
I apologize, I wasn't in subcommittee, but this is essentially just stops someone from moving in the area, live there for a day, go qualify, and then they're representing through the cracks they fall through. They represent a large population of people they've never lived around, never been around.
That's exactly right, and this is this actually happened in Cherokee County. This is why it became something that we were aware of. When Chairman Hamilton was a member of our delegation, he was part of the process where we set our county commission up into posts with the intention of having the people that represent those areas live in those areas, and without this loophole fixed in general code, we can't keep to the original intent of that action.
Thank you so much. Representative Fleming.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative, and I was reading through this as we spoke, and I was trying to remember this bill last year. I could have missed the committee meeting because I think I might have asked this then, but if a local city charter prescribes a residency period, or I guess an ordinance for a county commission, how would this interact with that? Or are those prescribed already by state law?
So if there is anything on the books today, it's unenforceable because OCGA does not allow for a durational residency requirement.
So there probably is in places, and
There are plenty of places where there are residency requirements in place, and they're simply unenforceable.
So what this says is by local law, that means each individual one of us would have to enact by local law for our city or county if they wanted this to be enforceable. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative. Any other questions for Representative Turner? Well, at this point, this time we'll entertain a motion. Motion do pass. Got a second? Any discussion? All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, like sign. Ayes have it. Thank you. Congratulations.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Turner.
Chairman. Thank you, committee members.
And at that point, I bid you all adieu and thank you.